We also notice that the accused is entitled only to reasonable doubt, not to fanciful doubt or any hunch or any hesitancy. Only reasonable doubts are allowable to an accused person. Then we notice the 4 sources of taking cognizance of an offense. The first source being private complaint, second source being police report, third source being source information other than a person, other than obtaining from a person, then the information of the magistrate when an offense is committed right in his presence. These are the 4 sources of taking cognizance. We notice the distinction between cognizable offense and non-cognizable offense and the curial act of taking cognizance of an offense. The curial act is the act of the court for taking cognizance of an offense. But cognizable offense, we notice that it is an offense which a police officer can arrest the offender without a warrant. They are not very closely related, except that the word cognizable is there in both the expressions. We noted the judge-made power given to the station house officer to conduct a preliminary inquiry in certain category of cases. This is not there in the CRPC. It is a judge-made law because the court felt that, the apex court felt that unless such a power is given to the station house officer, there may be very, very respectable persons whose reputation may be at stake. We noted the options available to a magistrate upon filing of a charge sheet or upon filing of a closure report, and that the magistrate is not bound by the conclusions reached by the investigating police officer. We noted that non-cognizable offences can be investigated by the police only on the strength of an order passed by the magistrate under section 155 to CRPC. And we also noticed that for approaching the magistrate, so even though section 155 says, 155(1) says that he may be referred to the complainant may be referred to the magistrate, there are instances where police officers themselves, SHO himself, will go to the magistrate and obtain orders under the 155(2). Nothing wrong, especially when we are living in a case where the complainant-friendly police have to do such duties to the body polity. We saw the distinction between cognizable offense and non-cognizable offense. It was pointed out that after investigation, the cognizable offense was if after investigation a cognizable offense was discovered to be a non-cognizable offense, then the police officer need not rush to the magistrate for obtaining orders under section 155 to CRPC. Instead, the police officer can file his report, and which can be treated as a complaint, and the police officer who conducted the investigation can be treated as the complainant. Now here, I had omitted to mention one question. I had to, in fact, we will discuss that after the recap is over. Then, can the magistrate take cognizance of a non-cognizable offense? There is a confusion among some lawyers, some judges even, that if it is a non-cognizable offense, court cannot take cognizance. In fact, I had come across a decision by a judge of a high court in India, wherein he had quashed the cognizance taken by a magistrate in respect of a non-cognizable offense, whereby the fallacy which he had been under was, if it is a non-cognizable offense, how can it be taken cognizance of? Wrong. Whether it is cognizable or non-cognizable, every offense, if they have to cross the barrier, the initiation proceedings, the magistrate has to take cognizance, whether it is cognizable or non-cognizable. Then we noted the impermissibility of the police registering a crime, conducting investigation, and filing a police report if any of the offense can be taken cognizance of by the magistrate only on the complaint by a specified authority under a special statute. Supposing a special statute says that an offense under this statute shall be taken cognizance of by a court only on the complaint by a specified authority or official, then that case, that offense can be taken cognizance of only in that manner, and no other manner. Therefore, if in that case, as a part of the same transaction, other offenses are also involved, still the cognizance of this particular statutory offense can be taken only by the magistrate upon a complaint. The complainant will have to file a complaint under the provision, and that complaint, and the magistrate can take cognizance of the special offense as well as other offenses on the strength of this complaint filed by the specified authority, not otherwise. We noted investigation of offenses by non-police officers. I specifically mentioned to you that every one of you should read Directorate of Enforcement versus Deepak Mahajan, AIR 1994, Supreme Court 1775, wherein non-police officers have been various statutes have been enumerated as per under which non-police officers have been invested with the powers of an officer in charge of a police station for the purpose of investigation. By such investiture, by itself, they don't become police officers. They are police officers only for the limited purpose of conducting investigation. After the conclusion of investigation, they can only file a complaint before the court unless the statute itself authorizes them to file a police report. We noted the various types of criminal trial. Then we noticed the act of taking cognizance on a private complaint. A few situations were discussed to elucidate the act of taking cognizance of an offense. The impermissibility of dismissing a complaint under Section 203 CRPC at the pre-cognizance stage was discussed, because Section 203 CRPC contemplates a situation where a complaint can be dismissed only at the post-cognizance stage. That is, section itself says after recording the sworn statement of the complainant and the witnesses, and after conducting an inquiry, if any, under Section 202. If the magistrate is of the opinion that the complaint is groundless, then he can dismiss the complaint. But there is a popular misconception that a complaint can be dismissed under Section 203 at the threshold. Wrong. At the threshold, of course, magistrate cannot be denied the power to dismiss a complaint under threshold. But that dismissal cannot be under Section 203, which contemplates a dismissal only at the post-cognizance stage. Therefore, that dismissal can only be at the threshold, but you can call it rejection. I brought to your notice a decision of the Kerala High Court, authored by this humble self, which said, because if the complaint on the face of it, ex facie, it does not make out any of the ingredients of an offense, why should the magistrate take cognizance? Why should the magistrate proceed further and waste the precious time of the magistrate? So magistrate can reject the complaint at the threshold itself. Then we noted that Sessions Court can take cognizance of an offence as a court of original jurisdiction only if the case has been committed to it under Section 193 CRPC by the appropriate magistrate. We also saw the exceptions to that, because Section 193 itself starts with an non-obstante clause, save as otherwise expressly provided by this code or by any other law for the time being. Then we saw that Section 202 CRPC, inquiry under Section 202 CRPC is not a must. For example, after recording the sworn statement of the complainant and the witnesses, the magistrate is satisfied about the commission of the cognizable offence, then he can straightaway issue process. He need not proceed to 202. But there may be cases where he entertains a doubt even after recording the sworn statement of the complainant and his witnesses. Is the offense really committed? Well, are they not exaggerating? In such case, the magistrate, if he thinks fit, can proceed to the next stage of 202 inquiry. But after the amendment of Section 202, 202 inquiry is a must in two cases. One, where any of the accused is residing beyond the territorial limits of the magistrate. If any of the accused is residing beyond the territorial limits of the magistrate has to conduct a inquiry under Section 202. And in yet another situation is, if the offences are exclusively triable by a court of session, the magistrate has to conduct an inquiry under 202. Can you say why? Why is it that if the offence is exclusively triable by a court of session, the magistrate is obliged to conduct an inquiry under 202? The reason is, if it is a police investigation case, there will be 161 statements of witnesses, with which the defense will be at an advantage to effectively cross-examine the prosecution witnesses. But if it is a private complaint and if ultimately the magistrate finds that the offences alleged are exclusively triable by court of session, the magistrate will have to commit the case to the court of session. When during the stage of trial, the defense will be at a disadvantage because there is no investigation by police. Therefore, that is why the magistrate has to conduct a mandatory inquiry under Section 202, so that the defense will be at an advantage to effectively cross-examine the witnesses with the statements of the witnesses recorded by the magistrate under Section 202 CRPC. Now I will. Now I had omitted to put one question to you. That is, supposing magistrate cannot give a direction under Section 156(3) CRPC if the offences are exclusively triable by court of session. I have answered your query. Now, supposing the offence, I'll get you the problem. Yeah, supposing the offences are 323 and I think it is 287. Two non-cognizable offences are involved in a private complaint, in a complaint filed by a person before the police. 323 and another non-cognizable offence are alleged by the complainant in a complaint lodged before the police. The police officer, by mistake, registers a crime and conducts an investigation, and then finally discovers that since both the offences are non-cognizable offences, he should not have registered the complaint. But anyway, can he not take shelter under the explanation to Section 2D CRPC, which we had discussed yesterday? Yesterday we discussed explanation 2D to 2D CRPC to say that if the police officer, after registering the crime and conducting investigation, discovers that the offences are not exclusively triable by a court of session, or I'm sorry, if the police officer, after investigation, discovers that the offence is non-cognizable, not cognizable but non-cognizable, then he need not rush to the magistrate for getting the permission of the magistrate under Section 155(2) CRPC. Instead, he can proceed with the report and file the report before the magistrate, and the magistrate will have to consider the report as a complaint, and the police officer who conducted the investigation can be treated as the complainant, that we discussed yesterday. Now here is a situation where the offences are both the offences are non-cognizable offences, and the magistrate according the magistrate, the SHO registers the crime, conducts investigation, and then discovers that both the offences are non-cognizable offences. Then can he not take shelter, or can he not press into service the explanation to Section 2D CRPC as we discussed yesterday. Your answer may not be correct, I'm afraid. He cannot take shelter under the explanation to section 2D because for the explanation under section 2D to get attracted, the offenses should initially be cognizable offenses. At least one offense should be cognizable offense so that it is a cognizable case. And after investigation, the SHO should discover that the offenses were, all the offenses were non-cognizable offenses. In such a case alone, the explanation to section 2D can be invoked by the police officer. There is a direct ruling of the Supreme Court. I was searching for that ruling. Keshavalal Thakur versus State of Bihar. In 1996, volume 11 SEC 557, where the Supreme Court said, for the explanation to get attracted, at least one offense should be cognizable offense, in which case alone, the police officer will be justified to in registering a crime and conducting investigation. If both the offenses are ab initio non-cognizable, to begin with, even at the outset, if they are non-cognizable offenses, how can he register a crime? How can he conduct investigation without the order of a magistrate? In the other case, one of the offenses is a cognizable offense. Therefore, by virtue of section 155 clause 4, it has to be treated as a cognizable case, in which case the police officer need not rush to the magistrate for getting sanction in respect of the non-cognizable offense, because fortunately for him there is a cognizable offense. Therefore, he can register a crime, conduct investigation. But if after investigation he discovers that all the offenses are non-cognizable offenses, then the law comes to his rescue. The law protects him, and he need not rush to the magistrate for getting sanction. Instead, he can file the report before the magistrate, and the magistrate will have to treat it as a complaint, and the police officer will be the complainant. Now, it is not a curable irregularity. In that case, Supreme Court said it is one explanation to section 2D CRPC cannot be invoked at all. Yes. Now we saw the distinction between the further investigation under section 156(3) and further investigation under section 202(1). Now take a case. I'll give you an illustration. A private complaint, the magistrate alleging cognizable offences. Magistrate records the sworn statement of the complainant and the witnesses. Then he proceeds to, then he is not satisfied. He is not fully convinced about the offence. He proceeds to 202 inquiry. 202 inquiry under section 202 clause 1, the magistrate forwards the complaint, or rather directs an investigation by the police. Because there was no investigation, this was a private complaint. The magistrate orders investigation by the police. The police officer, during the course of the investigation, examines witnesses, record their statements, signed statement. He gets their signature also, record their signed statements, and submit before the magistrate. During the trial of the case, these statements are sought to be marked, and it is argued that these statements can be used both for the purpose of contradiction and corroboration. Then it is opposed by saying that no, they can be used only for the purpose of contradiction as provided under section 162(1) provides. What is the position, legal position? As you all know, if if 162(1) is attracted, then first of all, signed statements cannot be taken, and even if signed statements are taken, court will be very cautious in approaching the testimony of that statement giver. Secondly, the interdict, it can be used only for contradiction, eliciting a contradiction by recourse to section 145 of the Evidence Act. It cannot be used for corroboration. That is what 162 proviso says. 162(1) proviso. Now, has not the police officer violated 162(1) by taking signed statements of witnesses? Number one. Is not the argument during trial that this statement can be used not only for corroboration as well as not only for contradiction under the proviso to 162(1), but also for corroboration under section 157 of the Evidence Act? Is that argument sustainable? At first blush, you may be inclined to think that it is not sustainable. That is because the answer is under section, it is not irregularity. Please don't try to answer before you get the answer. See, section 162(1) says, no statement made by any person to a police officer in the course of an investigation under this chapter shall, if reduced to writing, be signed by the person making, etc. Then we come to the proviso. I'm sorry. Same thing. No statement made by any person. Here is a statement recorded by the police officer during the investigation under 202(1). No statement made by any person to a police officer in the course of an investigation under this chapter. Please note the words. No statement made by any person to a police officer in the course of an investigation under this chapter. Now, the statements recorded by the police consequent on the order of the magistrate under section 202(1) is not an investigation under chapter 12. The bar under section 162(1) will apply only with regard to an investigation under chapter 12, which has to end in a police report as defined under section 2R and to be filed before the appropriate court under section 173 to CRPC. But where the investigation has been ordered under section 202(1), clause 1 of section 202, it is not an investigation under chapter 12. Therefore, the bar under 162(1) has no application. Therefore, the police officer was fully justified in taking signed statement of witnesses. And during trial also, those signed statements can be treated as any other statement, any other previous statement, and can be and is amenable to corroboration as well as cross-examination, like any other previous statement. That is the beauty of it. And in fact, where the magistrate orders investigation under 202 and filed under 173 to CRPC, that statement, that report of the police officer is not a 173(2) report. On the contrary, it is a report which enables the magistrate, including a police. Therefore, if in a case magistrate orders investigation by a police, that investigation is not an investigation under chapter 12, which will invariably result in a 173(2) report. Here the report is only to enable, to satisfy the magistrate whether he should proceed further or not, because he was in a doubt whether he should proceed further or not. So he conducted a 202 inquiry. He ordered an investigation. The report of the investigating officer will only help the magistrate to decide whether he should proceed further with the private complaint or not. So that distinction. Whereas if an investigation is ordered under section 156(3) CRPC, which till recently could be invoked only at the pre-cognizance stage, that investigation will invariably result in a 173(2) report. You please ask your doubts after the end of the session. Otherwise, it distracts my attention. Please ask your doubt after the end of the session. Please. I'm getting distracted. Yes. Now today we go to the various types of trial. We were to now we saw. Yes. Now we completed yesterday the preconditions for initiation of proceedings, which is
we can tell them the timeline that the questions can be posted in and around that time. So meanwhile, only they can answer on the interactive session. Let's assume you want to take the session till
They can
12:30.
note down. They can note down their doubts and
Yes, that's
ask
good.
after the end of the session.
Yes, that's what I've written on the chat, that do not kindly post the messages.
Yes.
Only
So
respond on the interactive session.
it diverts my attention. That is.
No, it diverts of everyone, including mine.
Thank
Yes.
you. Now, therefore, we completed yesterday the preconditions for initiation of proceedings, which is nothing but taking cognizance of an offence. Now, the offence has been taken cognizance of. The court has not dismissed the complaint after taking cognizance under section 203. As remind you, dismissal of a complaint under section 203 can only be at the post cognizance stage. Court has not decided to dismiss the complaint. Then the course open to the court is to issue process. Once process is issued, either in the form of summons or warrant, then there is a commencement of proceedings. That is the next stage. We are starting with commencement of proceedings. Chapter 16, CRP. Again, somebody is. Now, proceeding before a court commences with the issue of process under section 204 CRP. In a summons case, summons is to be issued. Summons alone is to be issued initially. And in a warrant case, either warrant or summons can be issued. The choice is with the magistrate. And where the accused appears, and if he seeks a sort of exemption during the trial of the case, if he wants an exception, he may have various problems. If he may have some disabilities in appearing before the court, he may be having other commitments. And if he honestly convinces the court that he wants an exemption from appearance during the trial of the case, he will have to file a petition. Now, as you all know, that while evidence can be collected behind the back of the accused by the investigating officer during the stage of investigation, when that evidence is adduced before a court of law during the stage of trial, the accused has a right to be present. Evidence can be adduced before a court of law only in the presence of an accused. Section 273 CRPC mandates that. Therefore, accused has a right to be present when evidence against him is being marshaled, is being adduced. Now, if he wants to remain absent during trial, he is forfeiting that right under section 273 CRPC. So he will have to file a petition, which should contain at least the following three ingredients. One, during his absence, his counsel may be permitted to represent him when the trial is going on. His counsel may be permitted to represent him during his absence when the trial is going on. Number two, he will not question the procedure of trial. He will not question the trial, the procedure followed by the court during the trial of the case, because he is forfeiting his right under section 273. Number three, he will not question the capacity of prosecution witnesses to identify him. Question of identity will not be raised by him. This is a very important point, because ultimately he should not turn around and say that no prosecution witness has identified me as the culprit. I was not in the witness box. No prosecution witness has identified me as the culprit. No. He will have to forfeit that. He will have to say that I will not raise the question of identity because it is on my request that I am remaining absent. All these three ingredients will have to be there in his petition. And if such a petition is filed, why should the court dislocate the trial? Let the trial go on. Courts should act very liberally on such petitions. That is my personal view. Anyway, that's what the Supreme Court also held in AIR 2000 Supreme Court 1456. That is UP Pollution Control Board versus Mohan Meekins Limited. 2000 Volume 3 SCC 745 corresponding citation, and Bhaskar Industries Limited versus Bhiwani Denim and Apparels Limited. AIR 2001 Supreme Court 3625 corresponding to 2001 7 SCC 401. Therefore, this is the position when the trial is about to begin and the accused wants to remain absent during trial. Then in special summons cases, in petty offences, there can be a special summons to be issued under section 206 CRPC. Therefore, in such a case, he need not be present during trial. He can even plead guilty through post. Section 207 and 208 are the provisions enabling or obliging the magistrate to supply copies of the prosecution records to the accused. Section 207 applies in the case of police report, and section 208 applies only to session cases instituted otherwise than on a police report. Then in the case of, if it is a case exclusively triable by a court of session, the magistrate, after conducting the necessary inquiry, if any, shall commit the case to the court of session under section 209 CRPC. Then section 210 is a provision which enables a court to try a complaint case as well as a police investigation in respect of the same offense. In respect of the same offense, there can be a police investigation as well as a private complaint. If the facts constituting the offense are the same in both, then the magistrate can club, the magistrate can consolidate, can have a, what should I say, consolidate the cases and try those cases. But if the facts constituting the offenses are different in the police case and in the private complaint, then the magistrate will have to try them separately. He cannot club them. And trial also will have to be separately undertaken. And after the trial of one case, the magistrate will have to keep the case pending and try the other case, and then pronounce the judgment in quick succession, one after the other. Now we come to the trial proper. This is only commencement of, we have crossed the second stage. Now we are crossing to the third stage, the trial proper. Now, as we already seen, usually every case is instituted before a criminal court, either in the form of a police report, that is 173(2) report, or in the form of a private complaint. This has been taken judicial notice of by the Apex Court in State of Gujarat versus Girish Radhakrishnan Varde, 2014, Volume 3, SEC 659. Now, in the case of summons trial and summary trial, the procedure is summons, but it is a less serious offense. That's all. Now, I will say, with regard to summary trial, there cannot be any sentence exceeding 3 months, which can be passed by the magistrate in view of the provision under section 260 clause 1 CRPC. And section 260 clause 1 enumerates 9 categories of cases which can be summarily tried. Then we come to, that is in chapter 21. Summary trial is in chapter 21. Then summons trial is in chapter 20, where the offense is punishable with imprisonment for 2 years and below. 2 years and below, not 2 years and above, but 2 years and below. So if the offense is punishable with imprisonment for 2 years, it can be treated as summons case. Above 2 years, only warrant case. Now, chapter 20. Then chapter 19A. 19A is warrant trial case instituted on a police report. Warrant trial case instituted on a police report. Chapter 19A. Slight difference in the procedure, that's all. Offenses punishable with imprisonment for more than 2 years. Warrant trial. Then chapter 19, section B. Warrant trial of cases instituted otherwise than on a police report. Mostly private complaint. That is 19B. Then lastly, chapter 18, sessions trial, where the offences are punishable with imprisonment for more than 7 years. That is sessions trial. Now, in the summary trial and summons trial, summons procedure is the procedure. So in summons procedure, there is no framing of charge. Since there is no framing of charge, there is no discharge also. And as and when the accused appears or is brought before court, the the substance of accusation or the particulars of the offense have to be read over to the accused, and his plea is to be taken. Whether it is summons case or trial, summary trial or summons trial. If it is a warrant trial or session trial, in fact, session trial is a serious form of warrant trial. If it is warrant trial or session trial, then there is the charge has to be framed. Court has to frame the charge. Apart from the police charge is the accusation by the police. Now, court, after perusing the police records, including the police charge, will have to frame a charge. If the session judge does not find that there is sufficient ground, there is sufficient ground for proceeding, or the offences are not made out, he can discharge the accused. But if he does not discharge the accused, then he has to frame a charge. That is the power of the sessions court. Now, the leading case on framing of charge and the irregularities attending the framing of charge, etc., is to be obtained in Willie Williams Slaney versus State of Madhya Pradesh, AR 1956, Supreme Court 116, Constitution Bench of 5 judges. That gives a detailed analysis of the situation where a court is framing charge and the irregularities in framing charge, whether any irregularity is fatal, any irregularity is a curable irregularity only. All those things are considered in that Constitution Bench ruling. It still holds the field. AR 1956, 56, Supreme Court 116, corresponding to 1956 Criminal Law Journal 291. 1956 Criminal Law Journal 291. 5 judges. Now we come to summary trial. That alone is some summons trial. Summary trial. Summary trial, the procedure is, after you get the notes, after you get my notes after the conclusion of this session, you will find better, you will know better, because I have given a chart. That chart contains the four columns showing each of the procedure of each of the trials. And in summary trial, see the types of cases. There are nine types of cases, categories of cases. Section 260 clause 1. Then the procedure is that of the summons case procedure, and substance of accusation or particulars of the offence is to be read over to the accused, and his plea is to be taken. No framing of charge. And conviction if the accused pleads guilty. And when an accused pleads guilty, court can convict him. Supposing he pleads guilty, has the court got to follow some procedure? There is a procedural safeguard which is obtained under section 164. 164 is the provision which strictly applies only during investigation. But then during trial also, the court has to be convinced that his plea of guilt is voluntarily made. So when an accused person comes before court, and when the particulars of the offence are read over to him, and if he pleads guilty, court has been satisfied that he is voluntarily pleading guilty of his own accord without any extraneous influence. For that, the court can even give him time for reflection. Court has to tell him, oh, look here, Mr. Accused, you are being charged for this offence. The punishment for this offence is imprisonment up to so and so, such and such years, and fine or fine. And don't be under the impression that if merely because you plead guilty, I will treat you with leniency. I will not show any leniency. Depending on the gravity of the offence, you will be given appropriate punishment. Therefore, you have no obligation to plead guilty. You are not bound to plead guilty. And if you are pleading guilty on the misrepresentation of some policeman or somebody that you plead guilty, then you can be let off with a fine. Don't be under that impression. I can award even the higher maximum punishment prescribed for the offence. You don't have to plead guilty. You think over it. I will give you time for reflection. He can be given time for reflection. If even after giving time for reflection, he pleads guilty, and the magistrate is satisfied that his plea of guilt is voluntarily made, then only he can be straightaway convicted and a sentence passed. Now, in summary trial, if he pleads guilty under section 252, he can be straight away convicted and an appropriate sentence can be imposed. Then in petty offences falling under section 206(2), the magistrate can issue a special summons provided under section 206(1), and the accused can plead guilty in his absence by virtue of section 253(1). And he can even plead, there is no necessity even for an advocate. He can plead guilty in his absence because the offence is only punishable with fine. If the accused is not convicted under section 252 on his pleading guilty, then the trial begins under section 254. The prosecution evidence, the magistrate need only record the substance of evidence. He need not record the entire evidence as in a warrant trial or session trial. He need only record the substance of evidence in view of section 264. Then after the prosecution evidence is over, 313 examination, unless the physical appearance of the accused had been dispensed with on his application. If he was present during trial, then his 313 examination will have to be conducted. Then thereafter, the accused, there is no provision for calling upon the accused to enter on his defense. Such a provision is not there. That is there only in warrant trial and sessions trial. Because the offences being serious offences, the punishment also being stringent punishment, there's no question of in a summary trial or summon trial, the accused being called upon to enter on his defense. Then judgment. The judgment can be a very brief judgment in view of section 264. If convicted, the accused can be sentenced to the appropriate sentence of fine. And even imprisonment, if no sentence, and if it is in the summary trial, not a petty offense, summary trial, no, the imprisonment cannot exceed 3 months. Maximum imprisonment which can be awarded is only 3 months. That is the procedure for summary trial. Then summons trial. In one case, in one Kerala case, in Kerala there was a situation where a particular magistrate's court for petty offense for summary trial, the summons for appearance before the court was being issued by the police in a particular magistrate court. And there were other magistrates also where summons for appearance before the magistrate were issued by the police, not by the court. That practice was found to be deprecated by the Kerala High Court in Rameshan versus State of Kerala, 2010 3 KLT 348, 2010 3 KLT 348. And in that same decision, it was also held that an offence punishable under section 279 for rash and negligent driving on a public road, it cannot be treated as a petty offence unless there is a notification under section 206(3). Therefore, that decision is important even outside Kerala, because police officer is not the person to summon an accused person to a court for answering a charge. It is for the court to issue the summons. Court has to summon an accused person to the court and not the police. Then summons trial also, the punishment is 2 years and below imprisonment. Summons trial. Summary trial is only 3 months. When does the trial begin in a summons or summary trial? When does the trial begin? Is it when the cognizance is taken? Is it when the cognizance is taken? Or is it when the prosecution evidence is started? Or is it when the substance of accusation is read over to the accused? There are three alternatives, three options. Which of these is correct? Now, you're wrong, Mr. Rajat Malhotra. We are talking about a summons trial. Summons trial, there is no framing of charge. I already told you. Please listen carefully instead of giving such wrong answers. In a summons trial, when the particulars of the offence are read over to the accused, the courts have taken the view that the trial has started. So trial in a summary trial and summons trial will start when the substance of accusation is read over to the accused, or the particulars of the offence are read over to the accused. The trial starts. Then in as you all know, in a summons trial case, in a summons trial police charge case, in one case the Kerala High Court took the view that after the commencement of trial, that is after the particulars of offence have been read over to the accused, and after the commencement of trial, the case cannot be prematurely terminated. Whatever be the contention, the case cannot be prematurely terminated. The case has to end in a conviction or acquittal. That was the view taken by the Kerala High Court, a learned single judge of the Kerala High Court. You are interested in knowing the name of the judge, it was Justice Padmanabhan, one of the finest session judges ever. And subsequently, he was elevated to the High Court also, retired from the High Court. He was one of the finest session judges. He took the view from the High Court that the case, once the trial has started in the summons trial, the case can end only in acquittal or conviction. There is no via media termination of the proceedings. The matter was taken up in appeal to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court in K.M. Matthew versus State of Kerala. This K.M. Matthew is the proprietor of the leading Malayalam daily, Malayalam Manorama. They were the on one side. So they took up the matter to the Supreme Court. K. Matthew versus State of Kerala, 1992, Volume 1 SEC 217, corresponding to AIR 1992 Supreme Court 2206. The Supreme Court took the view that the Kerala High Court was wrong, and even after the commencement of trial, the power of the magistrate to terminate the proceedings cannot be denied in the absence of any prohibition in the CRPC. That was the view taken by the Supreme Court in that case, K. Matthews case. Now, this decision was holding the field for nearly 12 years, during the course of which, throughout the length and breadth of the country, throughout the length and breadth of India, magistrates were terminating proceedings even after the commencement of trial without there were cases where magistrates were terminating the proceedings and the cases were not continued till the final stage. But it took for 12 years for the Supreme Court to realize the mistake committed by it. And in Adalat Prasad versus Rupalal Jindal, AIR 2004 Supreme Court 4674, AIR 2004 Supreme Court 4674, the Supreme Court, a larger bench of the Supreme Court, overruled K.M. Matthew to hold that once trial has started, there is no via media termination of the proceedings by the magistrate. It has to end in a conviction or acquittal. Either of the two has to follow. And court also held that 362, the provision for review power is not available to the court, even to the High Court. Therefore, the court, once the court has started the trial, it has to end in conviction. It cannot retrace its steps backwards and go to an earlier stage and terminate the proceedings. That was the view taken by Adalat Prasad. Now we are in summons trial. We said that the trial starts with the particulars of the offence being read over to the accused. Taking the cue from Adalat Prasad, Kerala High Court in two decisions took the view that supposing the particulars to be read over to the accused do not contain any offence at all, the ingredients, the facts constituting the offence are absent in the particulars to be read over to the accused, why should the accused be subjected to the trauma of a trial? Why should he be subjected to the ordeal of a trial? If even according to the police or the facts, the complaint, the ingredients of the offence are absent. One of the ingredients is supposing it is absent. then why should the accused be subjected to the ordeal of a trial? Why not terminate the proceedings? Because by that you are not offending Adalat Prasad, because trial is yet to begin. What Adalat Prasad said was, once the trial has started, there is no termination midway. Therefore, taking the cue from Adalat Prasad, Kerala High Court took the view. Two judges of the Kerala High Court. One is this humble self, and another is Justice R. Basant. They took the view that um, if the facts constituting the offence are absent in the prosecution records or in the complainant's records, then there is no question of court reading out the particulars of the offence. Therefore, at that stage, the case can be terminated. The citations are Anandvel versus Food Inspector 2010 3 KLT 49. I have only the KLT citation. Probably Mr. Prem Raj may be able to give you the corresponding AIR or INR citation. 2010 3 KLT 49. Then Dr. Kamala Rajaram versus DYSP 2005 volume 3 KLT 617. These are the two rulings of the Kerala High Court, which said that even before the commencement of trial, if there is no case to be made out against the accused, he need not be subjected to the ordeal of a trial. Case can be, his agony can be terminated at that stage itself. That was the view taken. Then we come to warrant trial, where the imprisonment exceeding 2 years can be awarded. When does trial start in a warrant trial or some sessions trial? When does trial start in a warrant trial or session trial? Is it when the offence is taken cognizance of? Or is it when the charge is framed? Or is it when the prosecution evidence is started? When does the trial commence? When does the trial start in a warrant trial or in a sessions trial? Both are graver offences. Both deal with graver offences. Now here also, the view taken by the Apex Court in AR 1979 Supreme Court 984, Ratilal Banji versus State of Maharashtra. Ratilal Banji versus State of Maharashtra, AR 1979 Supreme Court 984, is that trial starts with the framing of charge. Trial starts with the framing of charge. One question which I may ask myself is that if trial starts with the framing of charge, and supposing he pleads guilty, and the magistrate is satisfied, or the session judge is satisfied that his plea of guilt is voluntarily made, can he not be straightaway convicted without a trial? So has the trial started with the framing of charge? Number one. Number two, if trial starts with the framing of charge, why should there be in sections 242(1) warrant trial police charge case and section 246(4) otherwise than on police report and section 230 sessions trial? There is a provision that if on the charge being framed, the accused can say that I don't plead guilty, I claim to be tried. I don't, section says he claims to be tried. So he is not pleading guilty and he claims to be tried. When the charge is framed, which according to the Apex Code, trial has started with the framing of charge. But when the charge is framed and his plea is taken, he says, I don't plead guilty, I claim to be tried. Claim to be tried. So has the trial started? Anyway, that is a matter for a larger bench of the Supreme Court to ponder over in future. I am only telling you because this being a discussion session, this being a lecture session, and not on the judicial side. Had it been on the judicial side, I am bound by the ruling of the Supreme Court. But here we can discuss any situation on first principles. Therefore, going by the wordings of sections 242(1), 246(4), and 230 CRPC, since the words claim to be tried are also there, the trial I don't think can start with merely with the framing of charge. And there's another situation also. See, if the trial starts with the framing of charge, then in a case where in a case where the offence is exclusively triable by a court of session, so the magistrate has to commit the case to the court of session. The case comes before the court of session. Court of session, during the preliminary hearing under section 227 CRPC, after considering the materials produced along with the charge sheet, is of the view that one particular offence is not exclusively triable by court of session. So it was unnecessarily committed to the court of session. What is the option available to the court, sessional court, under section 228 1A? The sessions judge can frame charge and make over the case, transfer the case to the appropriate magistrate. Formerly it was chief judicial magistrate, now it is the appropriate magistrate under 228 1A. Therefore, the session judge can have to frame charge and then forward the case to the magistrate. Now, if with the framing of charge trial starts, how can the session judge, after the starting of trial, transfer the case to the magistrate? So that is also yet another pointer to hold that trial can start only when, after framing charge, the plea of the accused is taken and the accused pleads not guilty. According to my humble view, that ought to be the position. Now, pleading guilty by the accused is yet another instance of judicial confession. Earlier, during this investigation stage, he can confess, and the magistrate sitting under the holding a sitting, if the accused walks into the magistrate's court and says that I am the accused, I want to make a confession, can he do that unless he is sponsored by the police? If he is not sponsored by the police, can the accused walk into the magistrate court and say that I want to record, I want a confession to be recorded? Supreme Court has taken the view that he can. Magistrate can walk into the magistrate court. He need not be the jurisdictional magistrate. He can tell the magistrate, see, I am the accused. I want to make a confession. And if the magistrate is only rider for the magistrate is, he should be convinced that this person is an accused in an ongoing investigation. In that case, magistrate is bound to record the confession and he need not be sponsored by the police. Whereas, if it is a 164 statement to be recorded under section 164(5) of a witness or a victim, position is different. A witness or a victim, the 164 statement of a witness or victim can be recorded by a magistrate only if he is sponsored by the police. Whereas the confession under section 164(1) can be recorded without being sponsored by the police. This distinction may kindly be noted. We are not on the question of confession. That is for another class. Pleading guilty is an instance of judicial confession. Therefore, the requirements of section 164 CRPC also are to be complied with by the magistrate by saying that, Mr. Accused, you are not bound to plead guilty. Even if you plead guilty, this is the sentence prescribed for the offense. Don't expect any leniency from me. So you think over it. I will give you time for reflection. And if after giving time for reflection, he still pleads guilty and the magistrate is satisfied that he is voluntarily pleading guilty, then only he can be convicted. Now, if he pleads not guilty, whether it is in someone's case or in Warren case or Sessions case, if he pleads not guilty and claims to be tried, then only the case is posted for prosecution evidence. As you all know, the burden of the prosecution, it is for the prosecution to prove the guilt of the accused beyond reasonable doubt. But when the accused is pleading guilty, and if the magistrate is satisfied that he is voluntarily pleading guilty, which is the provision of law which is attracted, enabling the magistrate, apart from the CRPC provision, there is a larger provision which operates, enabling the magistrate to straightaway convict him. What is that? Section 58 of the Evidence Act. Section 58 of the Evidence Act says, an admitted fact need not be proved. Here is a person who is willing to admit his crime, maybe out of a prick of conscience. Accused says, I know that I committed this mistake, this offense. there's no point in my pleading not guilty. I'm an honest person. I came to commit this offense under certain circumstances, which I am prepared to place before the court. Therefore, I am pleading guilty. So he is admitting the guilt. An admitted fact need not be proved is the principle under section 58. That is why the accused, when he is admitting the guilt, there is no trial. Since he is admitting the guilt. Then we come to the, once he does not admit the guilt and he wants to be tried, the case is posted for prosecution evidence. The case is then procedure for recording evidence, which I am not dealing with. That says that will be a subject matter of another webinar lecture. It will be long. Evidence Act is a very comprehensive legislation, even the recording of evidence. Only thing is you have to bear in mind one aspect. While it is the burden of the prosecution to prove the guilt beyond reasonable doubt, and that burden lasts till the conclusion of trial. Burden is always on the prosecution, and the burden on the accused, even though under section 105 of the Indian Penal Code, the burden is on the accused. I'm sorry, of the Evidence Act. Section 105 of the Evidence Act says, if the accused is pleading any of the general exceptions or any of the statutory exceptions, the burden is on him, and the court may presume that those exceptions are not present. That is the position under section 105. But interpreting section 105 of the Evidence Act, courts have taken the view that even though the burden to prove the exception is on the accused or to prove his defense is on the accused, the standard of proof or the degree of proof on the accused is not as high as that on the prosecution. The accused need prove or need establish his defense only by the yardstick which is available in a civil case. That is preponderance of probabilities. If the accused is able to say that this is probable, this defense is very much probable, then he can be said to have proved his case. He need not prove his defense beyond reasonable doubt. There can be a doubt. If he is able to create a doubt, then the benefit of doubt should go to the accused, because he is presumed to be innocent until and unless he is proved guilty by the court. So now, if you go by the definition of evidence under section 3 of the Evidence Act, you will find that the definition of evidence takes in only oral evidence and documentary evidence. See, section 3 of the Evidence Act, if you go through the definition, evidence definition takes in only oral evidence and documentary evidence. Then what about judicial or extrajudicial confession by the accused during trial? What about the statements including 313 statements made by the accused? What about the demeanor of a witness recorded by a court during trial? What about the result of local inspection conducted by a court under section 310? Because the court can certainly visit the scene of occurrence and make a local inspection, and he can prepare a note. What about those notes? Then what about material objects, MOs, which are produced as MOs before court in a trial? They don't fall under the definition of evidence. How do you resolve that? But very often courts do look into those aspects also, including material objects. For that, you have to look into the definition of the expression proved in section 3 of the Evidence Act. Section 3 of the Evidence Act says, a fact is said to be proved when, after considering the matters before it, the court either believes it to exist or considers its existence so probable, etc. So after considering the matters before it, these matters will take in confession, material objects, demeanor of a witness recorded during trial, all those things, other than oral evidence and documentary evidence, which alone are roped in by the definition of evidence under section 3 of the Evidence Act. Only that alone to be taken note of. In the notes, I have given you two charts as A and B, showing the entire conspectus of the Evidence Act. And as you know, Section 5 of the Evidence Act says what all things to be proved in a trial. Only facts in issue and relevant facts alone are to be proved. What is a fact in issue has been defined, and relevant facts, Section 6 to 55 of the Evidence Act defines or deal with relevant facts. So what is to be proved before a court is only facts in issue and relevant facts, nothing else. Facts in issue, Section 3 defines that. Then relevant facts, Sections 6 to 55 of the Evidence Act. Then after the conclusion of the prosecution evidence, supposing there are incriminating circumstances pointing an accusing finger at the accused, then he has to be examined under Section 313(1) CRPC, 313(1)B CRPC. Section 313(1) contains two clauses, A and B. Section 313(1)A is very seldom used by the courts, very seldom utilized or exercised by the courts, trial courts. 313(1)A enables the court, in the midst of trial, the court can summon the accused and ask him whether a particular statement given by a witness is true or false, or ask him about the statement of a particular prosecution witness. He is caught unawares, and his answer can be recorded by the court. Subsequently, when he is after the close of the prosecution evidence, he is examined under Section 313(1)B. Court can always take into account the earlier answer given by this witness, by this accused. But unfortunately, our trial courts do not exercise this power under Section 313(1)A. They only exercise the power under Section 313(1)B, where we have noticed that it is only an empty formality. He is answering all questions as on the instructions of the counsel, and the instruction will be that you deny everything. Supposing one prosecution witness says he is the accused is the son of so and so and so and so. When that is put to him, he will say false, denied. He will even deny his paternity. That is what we have seen during trial. Therefore, there's an instruction to deny everything, whatever be the questions put to him. Therefore, the accused is the relevance of 313(1)B examination is that every incriminating circumstance, every circumstance which is against the accused should be put to him and his explanation elicited. This is a facet of the Audi Alterum Partem doctrine. Audi Alterum Partem doctrine in the principles of natural justice. No person shall be condemned unheard. Therefore, when there are incriminating circumstances appearing in the evidence for the prosecution, each and every circumstance has to be put to the accused and his explanation elicited. He may deny or he may say that I don't know, whatever be his answer. He should be put to notice that these are the circumstances appearing against you in the prosecution evidence. And if ultimately the court convicts him, and if one or two circumstances which were against him were not put to him during 313 examination, that conviction is bad. That conviction is bad because the two vital incriminating circumstances appearing in the prosecution evidence were not put to him and his explanation not elicited. Therefore, that will have a serious inroad into the prosecution, the veracity of the prosecution case. The leading case on this subject is Sharad Birdi Chand Sharada versus State of Maharashtra, AR 1984 Supreme Court 1622, wherein the Supreme Court stated that each and every circumstance has to be put to him and his explanation elicited. It is a very, very important stage in the prosecution, in the trial of a criminal case. But if during the trial of the case, the physical presence of the accused had been dispensed with on his own application, then he need not be examined under Section 313. 313 itself says, because he had forfeited his right to be present when evidence is adduced against him. Under section 273, he has got a right to be present. He had forfeited his right by filing an application for exemption. Therefore, he need not be, these questions, these incriminating circumstances need not be put to him during 313 examination. In sessions trial only in sessions trial, warrant trial procedure and session trial procedure are same. But in session trial, there's one stage before the accused is called upon to enter on his defense. In session trial, the procedure is after the prosecution evidence is over, there is a 232 stage, a stage under section 232 CRPC. If there is no evidence adduced, if the prosecution has not adduced any incriminating evidence, there are no incriminating circumstances at all in the prosecution evidence, the accused need not be subjected to the trauma of a subsequent trial. He need not be dragged to the subsequent stage of the trial. The session judge is enabled to terminate the proceedings at that stage soon after the prosecution evidence. The accused can be an order of acquittal can be recorded by the session court under section 232 CRPC. Courts have taken the view that this is a very important stage, and it is only if the court crosses the stage can the accused be called upon to enter on his defense under section 233. Now, very often I have seen session judges committing one mistake. See, after the 313 examination, a stock question is asked. Have you got anything else to say? Have you got witnesses? Have you got defense evidence? He will say nothing more. I have answered all the questions put by your honor. I have no defense evidence. Then 232 stage comes. Supposing the court says that this is not a case of no evidence for the prosecution, therefore I have to cross over. I have to cross over to the next stage. The court has to make a record, at least in the proceeding paper, that the accused is not, there's no order of acquittal recorded under section 232 CRPC, because this is not a case of no evidence for the prosecution. Then only the question of calling upon the accused to enter on his defense arises. Therefore, an accused person who had told the court that I have no defense evidence when he was examined under section 313 can nevertheless come out with a statement when he is called upon to enter on his defense that I have got defense evidence. Court cannot blame him, or court cannot find him fault for stating that he has no defense evidence when he was questioned under 313, examined under 313. Because 313 is not the stage for asking that question. Therefore, when after 232 stage in sessions trial, this is only one stage, only exception in sessions trial. After 232 stage, the court has to make a record. Since this is not a case of no evidence for the prosecution, I am not passing an order recording acquittal of the accused under section 232. Therefore, accused is called upon to enter on his defense. At that stage only it has to be asked, and at that stage, whatever be his earlier answer, the accused is entitled to say that I have got defense. He cannot be blamed for saying otherwise at an earlier stage. This is the only difference regarding sessions trial. Then if he has got defense evidence, it has to be posted for defense evidence. After the defense evidence is over, the case has to be posted for arguments. Prosecution has to first address the court because the burden is always on the prosecution. Then the defense lawyer will argue. Then comes the judgment of the criminal court. The only thing is the judges, if there is any session judge attending this webinar, is every accused has to be specifically acquitted of, has to be found guilty or not guilty of each and every offense he is charged with, and then he should be said that he is convicted. Supposing he is charged under section 326, 307 and 302. Finally, if you are convicting him for all the three offenses, the session judge will have to say the accused is accordingly found guilty of the offenses punishable under section 326, 307 and 302 and is convicted thereunder. His bail bonds are cancelled. These are the words to be remembered by a session judge. Supposing he is acquitted also, in that case, because these are the requirements of section 354 CRPC, which mandate that the court, while acquitting or convicting, if the court is acquitting, the accused is accordingly found not guilty of the offences punishable under section 326, 307 and 302 IPC and is acquitted thereafter, he shall be set at liberty forthwith, unless his continued detention is found necessary in connection with some other case. This should be the stock wording of a session judge. Accused is found not guilty of the offences punishable under each and every offence charged with has to be mentioned. 326, 307, 302 IPC and is acquitted thereunder. Not enough. He shall be set at liberty. If you have attended any class on bails, or if you have read the decisions on bail, you will find that when a person who is in custody, when he is released on bail, he is not set at liberty. He is only released from the custody of law to the custody of his own sureties, who are nothing, who are nobody, who are only jailers of his own choice. Sureties are jailers of his own choice. Therefore, he is not set at liberty. This setting at liberty as a free man occurs only when he is finally acquitted of the charges. That's all. With the judgment, the case is over and our discussion on criminal trial is also over. I am now open to questions.
We can now ask the participants
Yes.
that they can post the questions now. And those participants who had already posted the questions, they can repost it because there were certain questions and there was certain interaction. It's in the fitness of things that they can post it right now. We can start taking the question. And for the participants, knowledge that since we had the second session today in the morning, and what the session which we going to hold today evening of Mr. Balu, we have shifted it for tomorrow so that we thought that during the lockdown period they shouldn't feel that there's back-to-back two webinars. So tomorrow on the cyber security, we have this session. We will be sharing the invites. Meanwhile, I'll check out because few questions had been posted earlier. What is the extent and scope of section 159 of the CRPC? Is there in any case where section 159 CRPC may have been resorted to? If the investigating agency and the magistrates holds inquiry under section 159, or the investigation order is carried out under the order of section 159, or the investigation carried out under the order of section R at variance, what is the scope?
See, 159 is a provision enabling an investigating officer to refresh his memory by looking into the case diary. When the investigating officer refers to the case diary for the purpose of refreshing his memory, no objection can be taken by the defense, because you have to imagine the situation. And a police officer who conducts an investigation, he might have conducted investigations in so many cases. It is physically impossible for a police officer to recollect the facts and circumstances of each and every case investigated by him. In fact, that is why during search and seizure and during section 27 recovery, etc., he is preparing a Panchanama and getting witnesses for that. The law does not say that he should prepare a Panchanama. It's all because he is making a contemporaneous record of whatever done by him during investigation. Therefore, when it may be physically impossible, humanly impossible for a person, for a police officer to refresh, to come out with a statement about the details of investigation conducted by each and every case. He cannot be undertaken as a human tape recorder. That is why the law allows him to refresh his memory. So when he refreshes his memory, section 159 is a section which enables him to refresh his memory during the trial of the case. and if he refreshes his memory, no exception can be taken to that. But then, mind you, there can be situations where he is not only the investigating officer, but also the detecting officer. Of course, now recently Supreme Court has taken the view that a detecting officer should not conduct investigation. But I think that has been subsequently watered down. That was not the correct law because there can be a detecting officer as well. The detecting officer can also be an investigating officer. There can be situations. For example, a police officer, proceeding on patrol duty in a jeep, he stumbles upon an accused person. He effects a search and seizure and recovers narcotic ganja from him. And he prepares a masa, he prepares a panjanama, and he questions witnesses, etc. Nothing but investigation. So he is not only the detecting officer but also investigating officer. At least in chance detection, he has to be the investigating officer also. Therefore, anyway, Supreme Court recently took such a view. But since if he is a detecting officer as well as investigating officer, with regard to the acts of detection, with regard to the procedure resorted to for detecting the offense, he cannot refresh the case diary or refresh the record. But for the purpose of detection, for the purpose of investigation, whatever he did for investigation, he can look into the
So Sujit
somebody
Pathak,
is
difference
waiting for
between
admission.
difference between a reinvestigation and further investigation.
Reinvestigation is ordinarily cannot be ordered by a magistrate. It is the constitutional courts alone can order reinvestigation. Whereas further investigation is investigation from the stage from that stage at which the investigation was already carried out. And the Supreme Court has taken the view that further investigation cannot be done by the same agency. It has to be by a different agency. Anyway, I don't find any justification for that view, but that we are all bound by that view. But left to myself, I don't find that there should be same agency should conduct further investigation. Of course, nothing wrong if another agency conduct further investigation. But further investigation does not mean that same agency should conduct further investigation. Cannot foreclose. Anyway, re-investigation means de novo investigation, which can be ordered only by constitutional courts. That is the view taken by Supreme Court. Yes.
Because some people are also students, would you just elaborate what would be, according to you, the constitutional court? Under a provision under 482 would also term within this thing the constitutional court, or you will say that the under the writ jurisdiction or the plea taken in the High Court itself? Hello? Hello?
All high courts and the Supreme Court are constitutional courts, and their power is not confined to the Constitution of India alone. And we have seen in Pepsi Foods case where the jurisdiction of the High Court is invoked under Section 482. High Court can not only exercise the 482 power but also 227, 226 power, 227 power. All those powers can be exercised by the High Court. So it's not confined to 482 alone. And we call the High Courts and the Supreme Court as constitutional courts because they have wider powers, inherent power is given only to High Court, mind you, on the criminal side.
So we would be unmuting Mr. Sagar Kole. Is he there, Mr. Sagar Kole? So we can unmute him. Meanwhile, I can read the question because he's been participating actively since yesterday. Otherwise, I can read the question. Defense lawyer can take cross-examination of the complainant and witnesses before EBC or after EBC.
What do you mean by EBC? EBC means?
He will have to substantiate. Sagar?
Evidence before charge, sir. EBC.
Evidence before charge.
Yes, sir. In private complaint.
Private complaint, warrant trial. Warrant trial, private complaint. Warrant trial, private complaint.
Sagar, you can show your video also. Sagar, you can come on the video.
There are two stages in a warrant trial, private complaint, warrant trial. And both the Pre-charge examination gives a right of cross-examination to the accused. Unlike in the case of section 200. Under section 200, the accused, even if I told you yesterday, even if the accused happens to be present in court, he cannot participate in the process of recording the sworn statement of the complainant and the witnesses because accused has not been summoned to the court. Whereas under I think 245 is the provision, 246 is the provision, where he has already been summoned, and therefore when the prosecution witnesses are being examined, he has got a right of cross-examination, and he has also got a right of cross-examination after the framing of charge. Two opportunities he has got.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Lordship.
Welcome. You are welcome.
Yes. We have unmuted Radhika Guruswamy. Radhika, you can ask your question. Radhika? Radhika Guruswamy, did rape come under cognizable offense? If so, why still the rapists are free? Sometimes the police do not. If so, then why are still the rapists free? Sometimes the police do the same offense. How to take action?
That's not a legal question. That's not for us to resolve. Anyway, rape is a cognizable offense. For finding out whether the offense is cognizable or not, you look into first schedule to CRPC. So I think it is column 6, which describes the offense to be cognizable or non-cognizable. Graver offenses are ordinarily cognizable, and less graver offenses are non-cognizable.
So, could you please elaborate on the scope of and when can dismissal of a case take place, and what are the elements to be considered while dismissing a case?
Complaint. You mean complaint?
Yes.
Dismissal of a complaint. Yes.
Yes.
Dismissal of a complaint. I said when a private complaint can be filed before a magistrate, and magistrate can take cognizance of a offense on a private complaint. I told you when on reading the complaint, the ingredients of the offense are totally lacking in the private complaint, or there is no, these particulars of the offense are totally lacking, then the magistrate need not proceed further, because he can very well terminate the proceedings, but he cannot resort to section 203 CRPC, because 203 CRPC on the wording of the section itself, it can be exercised only after the cognizance. That is, at the post cognizance stage only he can exercise the power under 203 to dismiss the complaint. But the power does exist in a magistrate, though not specifically granted or invested by the CRPC to terminate the proceedings. When he has got a private complaint which does not make out any offense at all, he should dismiss, he should reject the complaint at the threshold itself. But dismissal, and if he wants to dismiss the complaint, he can proceed only under 203, and that too after at the post cognizance stage, only after taking cognizance.
What is the basic difference between a dismissal and discharge of a case? Are they same? When will the judge discharge?
See, discharge means discharge takes place only when in a warrant trial or session trial, where the court has got the power to frame a charge. If the court is not framing the charge for the reason that the offense is not made out, then court can discharge the accused. That is discharge. That is a stage at the pre-trial stage, discharge, the pre-trial stage. Whereas dismissal of a complaint can be only at the post-cognizance stage under section 203 CRPC. And in a police charge case, there is no question of dismissal. The police charge case, the court will have to either discharge the accused at the pre-trial stage, or after framing charge, after the prosecution evidence is adduced, court can acquit the accused, and thereby the prosecution case is thrown out. But there is no question of dismissal of the prosecution case.
We are unmuting Assistant Professor Ritu Panta. She has a question she can ask directly. Ritu? Ritu?
Yes,
Kindly unmute yourself.
Good afternoon. Good
all
afternoon.
of
Good
you,
afternoon.
sir.
Yes.
Good afternoon, Your Lordship. Sir, I have a
Yes.
question.
Yes.
Like you discussed about the difference between conditional, I mean, the release of a person on bail, because that is a conditional release. But sir, you said that the decision of upon the decision of a trial court, the accused is acquitted. So, sir, would it be tantamount to a conditional release, or would it be an unconditional release? Because
If
the
our,
prosecution,
if our, yes, come on, carry on.
because the prosecution might go in appeal as well. So that sort of acquittal might be a conditional.
No, it is total acquittal because he is acquitted of the charge and he is set at liberty by the court. Now 477A, there is a new provision, 437A or so, the new provision contemplating an appeal. There has to be a bond to be executed by the accused before the court convicting him. Anyway, that does not mean that he is not a free man. He is a free person. Once the court acquits him, he is set at liberty. He is a free person. But if while in custody during investigation, he is granted bail, he is not set at liberty. He was in the custody of law when he was in custody. That custody of law is transformed into custody of his own sureties, who are none other than jailers of his own choice. Instead of being confined to the four walls of the prison, he is confined to the custody of his own jailers called sureties. And they are always, and he and the sureties are always within the constructive custody of the court. He's still under the constructive custody of the court, and the jailers, his sureties, are also amenable to the orders of the court.
Thank you, sir.
Okay.
I will unmute Riddhi Bansal. She would like to ask the question directly to you. Riddhi, unmute yourself. Meanwhile, I will take the another question. What all defense can be taken while discharge of accused when it's a police case? It's a very sweet question.
That's a wide see, the prosecution evidence is false, the witness is lying. All those defenses are available in a police charge case, or a particular witness was a tutored witness. All those things are available. And supposing a document is a forged document, you can say that a document is forged document. It is not a genuine document. All those things, all those contentions are available.
So there are two sisters, Riddhi and Siddhi, very bright from our High Court itself. They are twins fortuitously. So we have unmuted them. Let's see who takes who will ask the question. Either Riddhi or Siddhi.
Good afternoon.
Then you will have to explain.
Good afternoon.
Sir, my question is, where there are more than one accused persons and
Yes.
one of them has been declared a proclaimed offender and one
Yes.
has been exempted from personal appearance by the
Yes.
order of the court, then
Yes.
will the magistrate commit all the accused or only those who appear before him, since under section 209 committal is of
Yes.
the case and not of the accused persons?
Yes, but then if the absconding accused is not available, and the person who is the available accused, his case cannot pend for an indefinite period. The sword of Damocles is hanging over his head for an indefinite period. Therefore, he will have to be tried and either acquitted or convicted. The absconding accused, there is a procedure for splitting his case, and
Yes.
that case will have to be split up. And court will continue repeat warrants against him every 3 months or whatever be the periodicity applicable as per the rules.
And the same will apply if the appearance has been exempted by the order of the court?
Parents
Appearance.
Personal appearance.
appear, yes. If personal appearance has been exempted, but then one risk he is running is that he cannot thereafter turn around and say that no prosecution witness has identified me.
Okay.
He cannot turn around and say that, because he has forfeited his right to be present during trial. 273 is the right.
Oh, thank you, sir.
Welcome.
So then, whether the magistrate can take a cognizance when FIR case is still pending. That's
No.
on the WhatsApp.
No, We have already answered on the question of cognizance. I gave you a problem. An FIR is registered and the accused and the FIR are produced before the magistrate, and magistrate remands him to judicial custody. Is the magistrate taking cognizance? With reference to 2006 Supreme Court, I told you that he is not taking cognizance. When the police is conducting investigation, the magistrate can take cognizance only when the investigation culminates or ripens into a final report. Because under section 190, police report is one of the sources of taking cognizance.
On a complaint, sir.
Yes.
Okay, I'm unmuting Mr. Mehta. He's a retired session judge, and he has also
fine.
taught in our judicial academy.
Fine.
Common line between you and Mr. Mehta is that he has taught in Chandigarh Judicial Academy while you were in Kerala Academy. Mr. Mehta, we are unmuting you.
I had taken class in the Jharkhand Judicial Academy.
Okay. Now you can say you have taken a class pan India. Probably Mr. Mehta has knowledge.
Correct.
So the dismissal of a complaint amounts to acquittal. Then what remedy lies to the complainant in that eventuality?
Private complaint. Private complaint has been dismissed. I didn't get you.
Yes. Yes. Private
What
complaint.
is the question? Is it acquitted? Acquitted.
Yes, acquittal.
Acquitted means he has to file an appeal. The complainant will have to file an appeal under 478.
Advocate Kannan.
We
We are unmuting Advocate Kannan.
378. 378. Yes.
Advocate Kannan, we are doing. Once I
Okay.
read that name, that in the mind, I just registered Justice Kannan. We had a very judge who was loved by one and all. And he has been on our sessions also. Yes,
Okay.
Mr. Kannan. Yeah, you have to unmute yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello, Lordship.
Yes. Don't
Ah,
call
it was
me
an
Lordship. I am a former judge only.
You will
Don't
be
worry,
ever,
Lordship.
you will be ever, my Lordship. Thank you for excellent lecture, my Lordship.
Thank you. Thank you a lot.
Lordship, I have a doubt regarding this
Yes.
thing.
If it is
I have-
within my competence, I will answer.
Lordship, I have just referred section 202, what you are saying.
Yes.
In the proviso, I can see why the investigation cannot be ordered under section 202 in
Yes.
proviso.
Yes. Proviso. Because of the offences are exclusively triable by a court of session.
Oh, so magistrate cannot order in these cases.
Yes. Yes.
And one more thing, whether the complaint has not been made by the court. This is the another circumstance where the magistrate cannot order investigation. Am I right, Lordship?
You are right. You are right. You are right.
Yes, Lord.
Because of the proviso. Proviso.
Okay, Lordship. Okay. Thank you, Lordship. Thank you. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
So we have Mr. VN M. Nair. We are also unmuting him. Mr. Nair.
Hello, sir.
Yes. Please.
Sir, the session,
Are you an advocate practicing in the?
no, sir, I am a law student only.
Oh, fine.
So the session court wrongfully acquits a mother accused.
Yes.
And the state does not go for appeal on account of political reasons.
Yes.
Can High Court or Supreme Court suo moto initiate action for review the case?
Ordinarily, they will not. But now after the amendment of section 372 CRPC, the victim includes a person, the near relative of the deceased also. Victim can file an appeal before the court to which ordinarily appeals lie.
Okay. Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yes.
Usually they don't do this.
Usually, it is for the state to file appeal. That was the position earlier. But then the legislature stepped in by amending section 372 by incorporating a proviso to section 372 CRPC. As per that proviso, if this even where the sentence is a lesser sentence, a very flea bite sentence, supposing sentence awarded is a flea bite sentence, then also the complainant can file an appeal. Likewise, if the case ends in acquittal, then also the complainant can file an appeal before the appropriate appellate court.
Okay. Thank you, my lordship.
Welcome.
I don't think we have any other question. I am asking one. Vishal Bagre, we are unmuting him. Vishal, we are unmuting you. If any other question is to be there, then otherwise a formal vote of thanks and all we will go. Okay, Vishal says he had sent me that kindly read one of the question. He says nothing. So I think nobody else, because after such exhaustive 2 sessions, I don't think, but the way you said that I have already answered it. But sometimes the questions are only asked because after the question is asked and then the answer is given. That gets more registered because you focus more on that particular question and the answer. In the session, sometimes one does believe that the session is for 1.5 hours. Then sometimes the mood swings and otherwise also one is there. So I, on behalf of,
and in case you receive some doubts or some questions in writing, you can forward it to me. I'll give a written answer. Anytime.
we will do that. We will do that. We will do that. So only one thing we will say that, as we had discussed yesterday, even on today, that. So I have just received 2 messages on the, since we had this time gone on the YouTube live, Vishal has been kind enough to post me the message. Yagendra Yadav from on the YouTube post. Sir, can the magistrate order for further investigation under section 173(8) of the CRPC after the magistrate has taken the cognizance?
See, under 173(8), even after taking cognizance, the magistrate can order further investigation.
Okay. And Anurag Jain, please explain the interplay of sections 160, 61 and 162.
161 and 162. See,
So
161
160 up to 162.
160 is the provision enabling a police officer to summon persons for interrogation, etc. And ladies are exempted. Unfortunately, there's a decision from the by the Supreme Court in a case arising from the Madras High Court, where the Madras High Court said that if the accused is a woman, is a female, then she should not be summoned to the police station because of 160. But then the Supreme Court took a view that since 160 uses the expression only witness, an accused is not taken in by that expression. Therefore, accused does not. In fact, overruling the Madras High Court decision, according to me, a wrong decision was rendered by the Supreme Court by reversing the decision of the Madras High Court, which said that the protection under 160 is available to a female accused also. She should not be summoned to the police station for interrogation. In fact, a police officer should find a suitable place which is convenient for her for her interrogation. Then, of course, section uses the word, the title of the section uses the word witness. But as you know, 160, 161 and 162 form a package. In fact, section 161 also uses the word witness title. But that has been interpreted right from the Privy Council that any person supposed to be acquainted with the facts and circumstances of the case occurring in section 161 includes an accused person also, not only a witness, but an accused person also. That is why when an accused person is questioned by the police, his confession, etc., is not admissible unless a part of that statement falls under section 27 of the Evidence Act. In that portion which is admissible under section 27 alone is admissible, and rest of the confessional statement of the accused is not recorded. In fact, in Jakar and Singh case, 95 Supreme Court made a mistake by saying that the disclosure statement recorded under section 27 of the Evidence Act. That is a mistake. Of course, Supreme Court within exactly 1 year after that, on 25/4/1996, the judgment was rendered on 25/4/1995. On 25/4/1996, Supreme Court suo moto reviewed that judgment, Jakar and Singh's case. But unfortunately, that was not reported by any of the law journals. And throughout the length and breadth of the country, unmerited acquittals are being recorded even now. There, a wrong statement made by the Supreme Court was the disclosure statement. The disclosure statement recorded under section 27. See, disclosure statement is not recorded under section 27 of the Evidence Act. Disclosure statement of the accused is also recorded under section 161 of the CRPC. But a part of that statement becomes admissible under section 27 of the Evidence Act. That is the law. In fact, Supreme Court deleted that portion, objectionable portion from the judgment. But no, none of the famous law journals reported that review judgment.
So what can be done is that now, since we have got a large group of on the WhatsApp, you should just share the judgment on with me. I will post it on the WhatsApp group. That itself becomes a WhatsApp as good as a journal, because we have.
No, it has been extracted by Justice Karpaga Vinayagam of Madras High Court, and so Kerala High Court also, Madras High Court, wherein the review judgment has been extracted in. I will give you the citation later. The citation is Nadarajan versus Pondicherry or so, the state of Pondicherry or something like that. Justice Karpaga Vinayagam's judgment, wherein in fact the only law report which had reported the suo motu review order of the Supreme Court was a bi-monthly journal published by the Kerala Judicial Academy. In fact, His Lordship came to know of that and borrowed that particular volume from the Kerala Judicial Academy, and it was extracted in the judgment by Justice Karpaga Vinayagam. But the funniest part is, long after the review judgment, one law journal reported the original judgment, including the objectionable part.
So Sloni Gautam has been kind enough to post your article on this, what you had written.
This article.
The article she has written, I will just read.
Okay.
Sir, can I ask one genuine
Yeah,
doubt?
yeah.
Because
Yes.
one Mr. Nair, he was asking about that acquittal. Suppose in case of an acquittal, and the answer was, of course, the victim is already having a right to file an appeal. Now, sir, the right of the victim that sprouts out from the proviso to section 372, which of course was introduced into the CRPC during 2009. And in considering an appeal, the powers of the appellate court, it is dealt with under section 386. Now, if you have a close reading of 386, the opening sentence itself would go to show, it says, after perusing such record and hearing the appellant or his pleader, just see the words, after hearing the appellant or his pleader, if he appears, and the public prosecutor. Evidently, no person is going to, leave out an accused. So the word appellant or his pleader connotes accused. And if he appears, and the public prosecutor, if he
It
appears.
is an acquittal. Acquittal means it is not the appellant. The victim will be the appellant.
Yes, sir. No, sir. I am asking. See, the opening words of 386 would suggest, after
Yes.
perusing such record and hearing the appellant or his pleader,
Yes.
and the public prosecutor.
Yes.
So that definitely that connotes appellant is always the accused in that case.
Not
Why I am
necessarily.
why I am saying so? Why I am saying so is that it again
Fortunately,
goes on to say
fortunately, they have not used the word accused.
no. They did not use the word accused, and why I would say so, I would just come to that and kindly see. And in case of an appeal under section 377 or 378, see, in case of 377 state appeal, 378 appeal against acquittal, the accused, if he appears, the appellate court may, for such and such reasons, and then delineates what all are the powers available to the appellate court.
Confined
So-
only to appeals under 377 and 378.
Confined only to appeals under 377 and 378, and the first limb deals only with the appeals against conviction. So where does the power for an appellate court, what is the source of power as far as the 372 proviso victim appeal is concerned?
Mr. Premraj, source of power is 372 proviso. This is only procedure. 386 is
True.
only procedure.
Procedure, but
So the
Still-
appellate court will have to devise its own procedure and
Its
mold
own
the relief
procedure.
accordingly.
but
And
that
mold the
procedure
relief
it's not.
accordingly.
But that procedure
Of
it
course.
is not
See,
delineated, right?
there are situations under CRPC where an amendment is not taken note of by.
Correct.
So one last question we will take. Shivam Singla. Is there any, do you feel that there is any inconsistency between section 29 of the Evidence Act and section 164 of the CRPC? That's on the YouTube Shivam has posted.
29.
Section 29 of the Evidence Act and section 164 of the CRPC.
Promise of secrecy. Promise of secrecy is not a. He can say. 164, you mean confession or is it a statement? Non-confession statement or confession?
No, Shivam is not on the.
See, confession is relevant notwithstanding the promise of secrecy in the section 29. Therefore, even if there is a promise of secrecy, an extrajudicial confession can be is admissible. Even if the accused had confided with him that you shall not divulge it to anybody, notwithstanding the promise of secrecy, a person is entitled to make an extrajudicial confession. But that has nothing to do with 164, unless he is examined with regard to a non-confessional statement under 164(5) CRPs. If that witness is examined under 164(5), he can be examined. It has nothing to do with section 29, because section 29, he will not volunteer to come out with a confession. If a person is willing to confess, make an extrajudicial confession, he will not take shelter under promise of secrecy. That is the defense probably available to the accused. No, he should not confess because there is a promise of secrecy. Otherwise, that does not bind him. He is free to violate that promise and come to the court and prove the extrajudicial confession. That is my view.
So, since it's also one and we have no other questions also. So, two aspects, large number of people have sent on the WhatsApp as well as on the chat, that since we had promised that we will share the notes, like you had said that we will share the notes at the first instance, I said that let's unveil them after the session so that people have the interest also. And Prem is giving a smile, a broad smile. Probably he also endorses that if we had shared the notes instance, it's just like we will say the session was so engaging, just like a movie. So if we had circulated the entire storyline, then nobody would have watched the movie. So the session was quite engaging and interesting. The fact that back to back, it was the first experience of ours that we had two webinars of the same person back to back on the same subject, but it has been well received by everyone. And the interesting feature is that we had the participants level invariably what was at the start and at the end. There's not much slip. Otherwise, usually there is slip. They say that if the life is like an ECG and if it is a straight line, then it's a threatening thing. But if it is a webinar and it's more like a ECG straight line, it gives you more happiness that the participants are actually enjoying it. The words cannot express the gratitude. I will just ask you to share those notes. We will post it on our WhatsApp group. We have already sent the message of our WhatsApp group. And this session, and one of them has asked that could we have a session on an appeal or revision. If you connect to our Beyond Law CLC channel, you will find that we had already had a webinar on difference between an appeal and a revision on the criminal side. But as they say, Beyond Law CLC, we are also thinking of beyond coronavirus also. We will always have people like Justice V. Ramkumar who will give his insights. Thank you for all this. But since we have Mr. Prem Raj from Kerala, so there couldn't be a better way for connecting to Mr. Prem Raj. So we will ask him to propose a vote of thanks on behalf of Beyond Law CLC, because that's a way that you can actually get seamlessly connected together. Thank you, Prem, and thank you, sir. And for the session on cyber
weapon on earth, even if it is above the earth or beneath the earth. And that is what we got by this legal lecture by such a prodigious legal luminary. And as far as the lawyer is concerned, legal education and updation with the latest positions, that is one of the most profitable investments, I would say. So on behalf of the host, Beyond Law CLC, and the entire audience who belong, of course, to the legal fraternity, who have been keenly lending their ears to this great lecture. And on my own behalf, I extend a very hearty vote of thanks to His Lordship Justice Ramkumar for sharing with us a very clear and sharp understanding vis-a-vis the subject. And sir, your talk was absolutely insightful. It was full of wisdom and information. And His Lordship having shared with us all the relevant inputs, now it is up to us to make the optimal use of this potential learning. And sir, we were so enlightened by your engaging talk. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much.
Welcome.
Thank you. And those who want to participate, they will have to WhatsApp on this rather than we will not take from the chat. Just connect on the number what we have posted on the chat box for the updates on the webinar. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Prem. And thank you all the participants. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay blessed, and all more. the rigor should be there, that they should participate in the more on the webinars, because they say the knowledgeful mind can bring best of the ideas, not only for India, but for the world. Thank you, everyone.